In the glittering heart of New York City, where ambition is a currency and kindness a forgotten luxury, a young waitress named Kelsey lives a life of quiet desperation. Drowning in her mother's medical bills, every $20 tip is a lifeline. But when she finds a Patek Philippe watch, a masterpiece worth more than she could earn in a lifetime left behind by the city's most reclusive billionaire, she faces an impossible choice. In a world that rewards the ruthless, Kelsey performs an act of radical honesty, returning the watch without a word. She expected nothing. What she got was the key to a world of unimaginable wealth and a drama she could never have foreseen. The relentless symphony of New York City was the soundtrack to Kelsey Ellison's life, a chaotic crescendo of screeching tires, distant sirens, and the ceaseless murmur of a million hurried conversations. At 23, she felt less like a resident and more like a ghost haunting the periphery of its dazzling existence. Her world was a cramped fifth-floor walk-up in Queens, a stark contrast to the opulent stage where she performed her nightly role, a waitress at Aurelia, one of Manhattan's most exclusive and astronomically expensive restaurants. Aurelia was a universe unto itself. Nestled in a discreet corner of the Upper East Side, it was a sanctuary for the city's elite. A place where fortunes were discussed over truffle-infused everything, and billion-dollar deals were sealed with the clinking of crystal glasses. The air within its hallowed velvet-draped walls was thick with the scent of money power and a rarefied perfume that Kelsey could never quite identify, but which clung to her cheap uniform long after her shift ended. For Kelsey, Aurelia was both a lifeline and a gilded cage. The tips when the patrons were feeling generous were the only thing keeping her and her mother afloat. Her mother Clara was a fragile shadow of her former self, tethered to a labyrinth of medical equipment that filled their small living room with a constant rhythmic beeping. Multiple sclerosis had been a cruel thief, stealing her mobility, her career as a dance instructor, and the vibrant light from her eyes. The medical bills were a relentless rising tide, and Kelsey felt like she was constantly treading water, the threat of drowning a daily reality. Each evening, Kelsey would transform. She would shed her worn-out sneakers and faded jeans, the emblems of her real life, and slip into the crisp black uniform of Aurelia. She'd tie her honey-blonde hair into a severe, elegant bun, apply a mask of polite indifference, and become an unobtrusive cog in the restaurant's flawless machinery. She was an expert at anticipating needs before they were voiced, at refilling a water glass without interrupting a hushed conversation, at being present but unseen. Her colleagues were a mixed bag of jaded veterans, aspiring actors, for whom waitressing was a necessary evil, and fiercely competitive career servers who guarded their sections like feudal lords. The undisputed queen of this latter category was Jessica, a woman whose smile was as sharp as her stilettos. Jessica, with her raven black hair and calculating eyes, moved through the restaurant with a predatory grace, her charm a carefully deployed weapon to secure the best tables and the most lucrative tips. She viewed Kelsey's quiet competence not with respect, but with suspicion, seeing her as a rival in a silent, undeclared war. Table 7 is nursing a single espresso for the last hour. Jessica would hiss, a ghost of a smirk playing on her lips. Don't expect to make rent off that one, sweetie. Kelsey would just nod her face, a neutral mask, refusing to give Jessica the satisfaction of a reaction. She had bigger battles to fight than petty workplace rivalries. Among the pantheon of Aurelia's regulars, one figure stood apart, shrouded in an aura of mystery and immense power. Mr. Paul Winslow. Winslow was a name whispered in awe in the financial districts of the world, a tech mogul who had built an empire from a single revolutionary idea conceived in a sterile Silicon Valley garage. He was notoriously reclusive, his face rarely gracing the pages of the magazines that dissected the lives of the wealthy. He was, to most of the world, a phantom, a ghost in the machine of global commerce. But at Aurelia, he was a tangible, albeit intimidating presence. He dined alone, always at the same secluded corner table, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He never made a reservation. The table was simply always held for him. His arrival was a silent, well-rehearsed ballet. The maitre d', a formidable Frenchman named Antoine, would greet him with a deep, respectful nod, never a word. A server, usually one of the senior staff, would be assigned, tasked with the high-stakes duty of serving a man who communicated in gestures and monosyllables. Mr. Winslow was not handsome in the conventional polished way of the other men who frequented Aurelia. His features were sharp, almost severe, with a strong jawline that was perpetually shadowed by a hint of stubble. His dark hair was threaded with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly intense shade of grey, seemed to miss nothing. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world not as a place to be enjoyed, but as a complex system, to be analysed, understood, and conquered. He dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits that seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more remote. Kelsey had never served him. She was too junior, too insignificant in the restaurant's rigid hierarchy. She would observe him from a distance, a silent, unmoving figure in the corner, his focus entirely on the tablet he always brought with him. He ate with a mechanical precision, his movements economical and devoid of any apparent pleasure. He was a puzzle, a stark silhouette against the restaurant's opulent backdrop, and Kelsey, a natural observer, found him strangely compelling. He seemed utterly alone, not in a way that elicited pity, but in a way that suggested a deliberate, self-imposed isolation. One Tuesday night in late October, the city was slick with a persistent cold rain. The restaurant was unusually busy, a cacophony of clattering cutlery and booming laughter. A senior waiter had called in sick, and the meticulously planned order of service was thrown into disarray. Antoine, his face a mask of barely controlled panic, scanned the floor. His eyes landed on Kelsey. "Ellison," he said, his voice clipped. "Table 4. Mr. Winslow." A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through Kelsey. She felt a dozen pairs of eyes, including Jessica's venomous glare, fix on her. This was it. A test. A chance to prove herself or to fail spectacularly in front of the restaurant's most important client. "Yes, Antoine," she replied, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering of her heart. She approached the table with a practiced calm she did not feel. Mr. Winslow didn't look up from his tablet as she filled his water glass. His presence was even more formidable up close, a palpable field of intense, focused energy. "Mr. Winslow," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "May I get you something to start?" He didn't answer. He simply raised a single, long finger, pointing to an item on the menu that lay beside him, the seared scallops. Then he pointed to the main course, the filet mignon medium, rare. And finally to the wine list, a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a wine that cost more than Kelsey's monthly rent. Kelsey simply nodded. "Of course, sir." The rest of the service was a silent, tense dance. Kelsey moved with an almost preternatural grace, anticipating his needs with an uncanny precision. She refilled his wine glass at the exact moment it was required, replaced his silverware with silent efficiency, and cleared his plates with a swift, unobtrusive movement. She never spoke unless it was absolutely necessary, sensing that he valued silence above all else. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his grey eyes as he watched her. Not warmth, but a flicker of acknowledgement of surprise. He seemed to see her, truly see her, not as a waitress, but as a competent, efficient presence. When he was finished, he placed his black credit card on the small silver tray. As Kelsey reached for it, her fingers brushed against the cool metal of his watch, which he had taken off and placed beside the tray. It was an instinctive, fleeting touch, but the watch's weight and intricate design registered in her mind. It was a Patek Philippe, a brand she recognized from the glossy magazines she sometimes flipped through on her break, a symbol of a level of wealth so vast it was almost abstract. She ran the card returned with the slip, and he signed it without a glance at the total. He added a tip that was more than she usually made in 3 nights. Then, with a final, almost imperceptible nod, he rose and left, melting back into the rain-swept New York night. Kelsey let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her body ached with a tension she hadn't been aware of. She began to clear the table, her movements automatic. As she gathered the linen napkin, her fingers brushed against something hard and cool. There, nestled in the folds of the napkin, lay the Patek Philippe watch. It was a masterpiece of gleaming rose gold, its face a constellation of tiny, intricate gears and dials, its leather strap the color of rich, dark chocolate. The light from the chandelier above caught the diamonds that marked the hours, making them glitter like captive stars. Kelsey's heart stopped. She looked around. The restaurant was still bustling, a universe away from her and the small, impossibly valuable object in her hand. She looked towards the door where Mr. Winslow had disappeared. He was gone. And in her hand, she held a fortune. The solution to all her problems. The answer to 1,000 desperate prayers. All she had to do was walk away. The Patek Philippe felt unnervingly heavy in Kelsey's palm, its weight far exceeding its physical mass. It was the weight of a moral crossroads, the gravity of a decision that could irrevocably alter the course of her life. Standing in the bustling, oblivious heart of Aurelia, she felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she and the watch existed in a separate, silent bubble of reality. Her first instinct was a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She quickly, almost furtively, slipped the watch into the pocket of her apron, the cool metal, a searing brand against her hip. Her eyes darted around the room, convinced that everyone must know that her sudden possession of this immense wealth was somehow visible, a glowing aura of guilt around her. But no one paid her any mind. The symphony of the restaurant played on, oblivious to the seismic event that had just occurred in her small world. Jessica swanned past, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Don't spend that big tip all in one place," she sneered, her eyes glinting with malice. Kelsey barely heard her. The snide remark, which normally would have stung, was a pinprick in the face of the hurricane raging within her. For the rest of her shift, Kelsey moved in a daze. She performed her duties with the precision of an automaton, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of thoughts. The watch in her pocket was a constant nagging presence, a siren's call promising a way out of her desperate circumstances. The images flooded her mind, sharp and painfully vivid. The mountain of her mother's medical bills, a stack of crisp white envelopes that seemed to mock her with their formal, unyielding demands. The tired, strained look on her mother's face when she had to confess she couldn't afford the new experimental treatment the doctor had recommended. The constant gnawing fear of the next unexpected expense, the next letter threatening to cut off their power, the next eviction notice. The watch could change all of that. It was a key, a golden ticket out of the labyrinth of poverty and debt. She could sell it, There were places in the city, discreet jewelers in the diamond district, who wouldn't ask too many questions. The thought, once it took root, was seductive, a poisonous vine wrapping itself around her conscience. She could pay off every single bill. She could afford the best doctors, the best treatments for her mother. They could move out of their cramped, crumbling apartment into a place with an elevator, a place where her mother could feel the sun on her face without having to conquer 5 flights of stairs. She could finally breathe. For the first time in years, she could breathe. The fantasy was so potent, so intoxicating that for a moment it felt real. She could almost feel the relief, the shedding of a burden she had carried for so long. It had become a part of her. But then another image intruded, stark and unwelcome. The face of Mr. Winslow. His eyes not cold as she had first thought, but empty. The eyes of a man who possessed everything, and perhaps felt nothing. A man who lived in a self-imposed fortress of solitude. She remembered the flicker of surprise of acknowledgement when he had watched her work. He had seen her competence, her quiet dignity. He had trusted her, and she was about to betray that trust. The thought brought a wave of nausea. The watch, which moments before had felt like a key, now felt like a stone dragging her down into a mire of deceit. She thought of her mother, Clara. Despite her illness, her mother had instilled in her a fierce, unyielding sense of integrity. "Your character is the one thing no one can ever take from you, Kelsey." She would say, her voice weak, but her spirit strong. "It's the only true wealth you'll ever possess." What would her mother think if she knew? The thought was unbearable. The shame would be a far heavier burden than any debt. The internal battle raged throughout the night. The devil on one shoulder whispered sweet promises of freedom and relief, while the angel on the other spoke of honor and integrity. By the time she was walking home through the deserted pre-dawn streets of New York, the rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt gleaming under the orange glow of the streetlights. The city was quiet, and in the silence her conscience spoke with a deafening clarity. She couldn't do it. She couldn't become a person she would despise. The money, however much it would solve, would be a poison, tainting everything it touched. The relief would be fleeting, but the shame would be permanent. Her decision made a strange sense of calm settled over her. It wasn't the giddy relief of her earlier fantasy, but a quiet, solid sense of rightness. The path ahead was still fraught with difficulty, the mountain of debt no smaller, but she would face it as herself with her integrity intact. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by her mother's bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the rhythmic beep of the machines, a strangely comforting presence. She held the watch in her hand, its intricate mechanism ticking softly, a tiny mechanical heartbeat. It was a beautiful object, a testament to human ingenuity and artistry. But it was not hers. The next day, she went to work with a renewed sense of purpose. She felt lighter, unburdened. She wrapped the watch carefully in a soft, clean cloth from her own meager collection of linens and placed it in her locker. She had a plan, a simple, anonymous act of restitution. Thursday arrived, and with it the certainty of Mr. Winslow's return. The day dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. Kelsey felt a nervous energy, a different kind of anxiety from the one she had felt before. This was the anxiety of anticipation of closing a chapter. As evening fell, he arrived, a silent, dark figure, cutting through the restaurant's cheerful chatter. He took his usual table. Antoine, following the new unstated protocol, gestured for Kelsey to serve him. Her heart pounded as she approached the table. He gave his order in the same silent way, pointing to the menu. She served him with the same quiet efficiency as before. Throughout the meal, she waited for the right moment, a moment when he was engrossed in his tablet, a moment when no one else was looking. The opportunity came as he was finishing his main course. The restaurant was at its peak, a whirlwind of activity. Jessica was fawning over a table of boisterous tourists. Antoine was at the front, greeting a new arrival. The coast was clear. With a deep breath, her movements swift and sure, she approached his table ostensibly to refill his water glass. In one fluid, practiced motion, she placed the linen-wrapped watch on the empty seat beside him, tucking it close to his briefcase. She didn't pause. She didn't look at him. She didn't say a word. She simply poured to the water and walked away. Her back straight, her heart beating a steady, resolute rhythm. She didn't look back to see his reaction. She didn't want to. The act was complete. It was an anonymous gift, a silent conversation between her conscience and the world. She had returned not just a watch, but a piece of her own soul that she had been in danger of losing. She had chosen the harder path, the path of integrity, and as she retreated into the shadows of the bustling restaurant, she felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. She was poor, she was struggling, but she was honest. And in the gilded cage of Aurelia, that felt like the most valuable possession of all. Paul Winslow was a man who operated on a plane of meticulous observation and calculated logic. His empire was built on his ability to see patterns others missed, to anticipate market shifts before they happened, to understand the intricate dance of cause and effect. His reclusiveness was not born of shyness, but of a profound impatience with the trivialities of social interaction. He preferred the clean, predictable language of data to the messy, often duplicitous subtext of human conversation. When the young waitress Kelsey had served him for the first time, he had noticed her. It was impossible not to. In a world of fawning sycophants and barely concealed avarice, her quiet competence was an anomaly. She moved with an economy of motion that he, a man who valued efficiency above all else, could appreciate. She didn't try to engage him in meaningless chatter. She didn't hover expectantly. She simply did her job, and she did it perfectly. He had left her a substantial tip, a logical reward for superior service. When he discovered his Patek Philippe was missing, he felt not panic, but a deep, resonant annoyance. The watch was a gift from his late father, one of the few sentimental objects he owned. It was a tangible link to a man he had both admired and struggled to understand. Its monetary value was irrelevant. Its loss was a disruption, a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of his life. He had immediately assumed it was gone forever, another casualty of the careless, grasping world he so assiduously avoided. He had already mentally commissioned his assistant to begin the search for a replacement, though he knew it could never truly be replaced. Now, as he sat at his table in Aurelia, 2 nights later, he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The same waitress was serving him. Her movements were just as precise, her silence just as respectful. But there was a new, almost imperceptible tension in her posture, a focused resolve. As she leaned in to pour his water, he noticed a fleeting, deliberate movement towards the empty chair beside him. He didn't react, his face a mask of indifference, but his mind, a finely tuned analytical engine, registered the anomaly. When she walked away, he waited a full minute, his eyes on his tablet, before allowing his gaze to drift to the spot where she had been. There, tucked against his briefcase, was a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic what it was. He slowly, deliberately reached for it. His long fingers unwrapped the simple clean linen to reveal the familiar reassuring gleam of rose gold. His watch. It was immaculate, unharmed. He ran a thumb over the cool, smooth crystal. A strange, unfamiliar emotion flickered within him. It was not relief, not exactly. It was a profound sense of surprise, a disruption to his carefully constructed worldview. In his world, people took what they could get. Kindness was a currency for fools, and honesty was a liability. Yet this young woman, who he knew from a cursory glance at her worn-out shoes, probably needed the money more than anyone in this restaurant had returned an object worth a small fortune. And she had done it silently, anonymously, without expectation of reward. This was a data point that did not fit his algorithm. It was an illogical, irrational act of profound integrity. And it fascinated him. He looked for her, but she was busy at another table, her back to him. He could have called her over, could have thanked her, could have handed her a check that would have solved all her problems, but that felt insufficient. It felt crude, a transaction. And what she had done was not a transaction. It was a statement. Paul Winslow did not believe in simple rewards. He believed in investments. He believed in nurturing potential. This young woman possessed a character that was rarer and more valuable than any precious metal. An idea began to form in his mind, a plan that was as unconventional and audacious as his business strategies. A simple thank you would be forgotten. A check would be spent. He wanted to give her something that would change the very fabric of her life, a tool, a key to a different future, an opportunity. He paid his bill, leaving another ridiculously large tip, and left the restaurant. But this time he did not disappear into the night. He sat in his parked Maybach a block away, its tinted windows rendering him invisible. He waited. An hour later, Kelsey emerged. Her shoulders slumped with the fatigue of a long shift. He watched her walk to the subway station, a small, solitary figure against the vast, impersonal backdrop of the city. He didn't follow her. He didn't need to. He had all the information he required. He picked up his phone and made a call to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Michael. The instructions he gave were precise, unorthodox, and left no room for error. The next day Kelsey arrived at Aurelia, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her. The air in the staff changing room, usually thick with tension and gossip, felt breathable. Even Jessica's customary snare seemed to lack its usual bite. "Don't look so smug," Jessica hissed as Kelsey passed her. "He probably won't even request you again." Kelsey just smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Have a good service, Jessica." She went to her locker, a small, dented metal box that held her street clothes and the few personal items she kept at work. She turned the key in the lock, the familiar squeak of the hinge a part of her daily routine. But as the door swung open, something fell out, landing with a soft thud on the worn linoleum floor. It was a small black box, sleek and unadorned. Confused, Kelsey bent down and picked it up. It was heavy, cool to the touch. With trembling fingers she opened it. Nestled on a bed of black velvet was a single car key. It wasn't just any key. It was a sophisticated piece of technology, its surface a glossy black, adorned with the iconic three-pointed star of a Mercedes-Benz. Attached to the key was a simple silver tag. Engraved on it was a single word, honesty. Kelsey stared at it, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. A car key. A Mercedes key. It made no sense. This had to be a mistake. A prank, a cruel, elaborate joke. "What's that you got there, Ellison?" Kelsey looked up. Jessica was standing over her, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Behind her, a few other waitresses had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and envy. Kelsey quickly closed the box. "It's nothing," she mumbled, her face flushing. But Jessica was too quick. She snatched the box from Kelsey's hand and flipped it open. A collective gasp went through the small group. "Well, well, well," Jessica said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Looks like someone's been getting more than just tips." She dangled the key in front of Kelsey's face. "A Mercedes. Must have been some service you gave Mr. Winslow. Or was it an after-hours service?" The implication was ugly venomous, and it hung in the air like a poison. The other waitresses exchanged knowing glances. The seeds of suspicion had been sown. I don't know where that came from." Kelsey stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The sense of peace she had felt just moments before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Oh, I'm sure you don't." Jessica laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Things like this just fall out of the sky for girls like you, don't they?" She tossed the box back at Kelsey, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face. The rumor mill had its grist for the weak. The quiet, unassuming Kelsey Ellison, the girl who kept to herself, was suddenly the center of a scandal. Kelsey stood there, the key feeling like a burning coal in her hand. She had wanted no reward, no recognition, but a reward had found her anyway. A silent, extravagant gift from a man she didn't know. And it hadn't brought her freedom or relief. It had brought her a new kind of cage, one built of suspicion, jealousy, and the malicious whispers of her colleagues. The silent virtue that had brought her peace now threatened to become the source of her ruin. The discovery of the Mercedes key transformed Aurelia into a hostile territory for Kelsey. The key remained hidden in her locker, a toxic secret, while the whispers it generated followed her like a shadow. Jessica, fueled by a potent cocktail of jealousy and righteous indignation, became the self-appointed narrator of Kelsey's supposed scandal, painting a lurid picture of a conniving waitress seducing a billionaire. "I heard he's leasing an apartment for her on Park Avenue," she'd stage whisper to rapt colleagues. Kelsey's quietness was reinterpreted as arrogance, her efficiency a ploy. She tried to ignore it, but the constant barrage of suspicion was corrosive, chipping away at her composure. Into this maelstrom stepped a new complication, Richard Evans, the restaurant's charismatic and ambitious floor manager. He was a man with a politician's smile and a predator's instinct for opportunity. In the days following the key's appearance, his professional cordiality toward Kelsey morphed into a deeply unsettling personal interest. "Kelsey," he said one evening, cornering her near the wine cellar, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Don't let them get to you. People are just jealous." Kelsey tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard smiled, a slow, knowing expression that made her skin crawl. "It's all right." He soothed his words, a silken trap. "Your secret is safe with me. A man like Mr. Winslow can open a lot of doors, but you have to be careful. You need someone in your corner, someone to guide you." He placed a hand on her arm, his touch lingering a moment too long. "I can be that person, Kelsey. Your friend." His offer was clear. He didn't want to be her friend. He wanted a piece of the action, a cut of the windfall he imagined she had secured. He was a parasite, cloaking his avarice in a veneer of charm. Kelsey pulled her arm away, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "I have to get back to my section," she said, fleeing his slick smile. Richard was the red herring, a dangerous variable, muddying the already murky waters of her predicament. Meanwhile, across the city, in a minimalist office overlooking Central Park, Paul Winslow was conducting his own, far more discreet investigation. The return of the watch had piqued his curiosity. The waitress herself had become a puzzle he was determined to solve. His gift of the car wasn't just a reward. It was a strategic move designed to elicit a reaction. He wanted to see what she would do next. His first call had been to Michael, his ex-Mossad head of security. The instruction was simple. I want to know everything about the waitress, Kelsey Ellison, Aurelia Restaurant. Be invisible. Within 48 hours, a comprehensive file was on Paul's desk. He learned of her mother's debilitating illness, the crushing weight of medical debt, the 5-story walk-up in Queens. He saw photos of her on the subway, her face etched with a weariness that belied her years. The file made her return of the watch even more remarkable. It wasn't just honesty, it was a profound sacrifice. She had held the solution to her desperate problems in her hand and had chosen to give it back. The data confirmed his initial assessment. Her character was an anomaly. But the data also revealed a disturbing new development. Michael's surveillance had captured the escalating harassment from her colleagues, the venomous rumors spread by Jessica, and most concerningly, the predatory overtures of Richard Evans. Paul watched a short, grainy video clip of Richard cornering Kelsey by the wine cellar, his hand on her arm. Paul's jaw tightened. A cold fury settled over him. His gift meant as a silent acknowledgement of her virtue had inadvertently painted a target on her back. It had made her vulnerable to the petty, greedy games of others. His initial plan to observe from a distance was no longer viable. He could not remain a passive observer while she suffered for her integrity. He had to intervene. But how a direct confrontation was not his style. Handing her a check now would feel like a rescue, a handout that would validate the very rumors he sought to quell. It would make her seem like a kept woman, diminishing the power of her own choice. No, the solution had to be as elegant and precise as her act of returning the watch. It had to be a statement, not just to her, but to everyone who had misjudged her. He sat back, his grey eyes fixed on the city below. The problem was complex with multiple variables. Kelsey's pride, Jessica's malice, Richard's ambition. He began to formulate a new plan, an intervention that would unfold in the very arena where the drama had begun. He would not just reward Kelsey's honesty. He would weaponize it. He would orchestrate a moment of public vindication so absolute that it would silence the whispers forever. He picked up his phone and made a call to the one person at Aurelia he trusted to be a professional. Antoine, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Paul Winslow. I need to book the entire restaurant for a private event next Thursday. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The entire restaurant, Mr. Winslow, Antoine finally stammered. The entire restaurant, Paul confirmed. And I will have a few special requirements for the service. The game had changed. The silent billionaire was about to step out of the shadows, and the final act of the drama was about to begin. The week leading up to Mr. Winslow's private event was a crucible for Kelsey. The news that the billionaire had booked the entire restaurant ignited the rumor mill, and she was the fuel for its fire. The whispers were no longer confined to the changing room. They were a constant, corrosive presence on the restaurant floor. Jessica, emboldened by the drama, grew more audacious, her taunts becoming sharper and more public. Celebrating an anniversary, Kelsey. She'd sneer as she passed, ensuring others could hear. I wonder if your mother will be able to make it. The cruel barb aimed at her mother's illness was a new low, but Kelsey refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Simultaneously, Richard Evans, the ambitious floor manager, escalated his own campaign. He saw the private event as his golden opportunity and was determined to position himself as the architect of Kelsey's good fortune. His support became suffocating. I've been putting in a good word for you, Kelsey. He'd lie cornering her by the wine cellar. When Mr. Winslow makes his announcement, you'll need an ally. We're a team, remember. His touch lingered on her arm, his feigned concern feeling more like a threat. Kelsey felt trapped between open hostility and cloying manipulation. The breaking point came 2 days before the event. Fearing he was losing control of the narrative he'd invented, Richard decided to make a bold, preemptive strike. He approached Antoine the maitre d' with a face of carefully crafted concern. Antoine, he began, his voice a conspiratorial murmur. I must speak with you about Kelsey Ellison. I'm worried. Antoine, whose only concern was a flawlessly executed evening for his most important client, gave Richard his full attention. What is the problem? It's about Mr. Winslow, Richard said, shaking his head, sadly. To be honest, it was actually I who found his watch. I returned it discreetly, wanting no fuss. But Kelsey, she's a sweet girl, but she has concocted a fantasy. She believes Mr. Winslow is infatuated with her, that he's giving her extravagant gifts. He leaned in closer. This event on Thursday. She thinks it's for her. I'm afraid she's going to deeply embarrass herself and, by extension, all of us. She's unstable. The lie was audacious and, to Antoine, tragically plausible. A young waitress developing an obsession with a wealthy patron was a scenario he could easily imagine, far more easily than a reclusive billionaire secretly gifting a luxury car for an unseen act of honesty. Protecting Mr. Winslow's privacy was paramount. I think it would be best if she wasn't on the floor that night. Richard concluded, his voice dripping with false empathy. Perhaps in the kitchens, for her own good, of course, to protect her from a painful disillusionment. I will handle it, Antoine said, his expression grim. Later that day, Kelsey was summoned to his office. Jessica watched with a triumphant smirk as the door closed behind her. Kelsey, Antoine began, his tone formal and cold. There have been serious concerns about your unprofessional conduct regarding Mr. Winslow. This restaurant will not tolerate such behavior. Kelsey's blood ran cold. The rumors are lies, she said, her voice shaking. I've done nothing wrong. Be that as it may, Antoine said, his voice final. Mr. Winslow's privacy is our highest priority. I cannot have any distractions during his event. Therefore, you are reassigned to kitchen duty for the evening. It was a public humiliation, a demotion that served as a verdict. She was being hidden away like a dirty secret, punished for an act of integrity she could not prove. The injustice was staggering. My decision is final, Antoine stated, dismissing her plea before she could even voice it. Kelsey walked out of the office in a daze, the victorious look on Jessica's face the final turn of the knife. She fled to the changing room, her composure finally shattering as she sank onto the bench, the key in her locker feeling like a cursed object. Her silent, virtuous choice hadn't brought peace or relief. It had led her to this. She felt utterly alone, convinced her own character had become the instrument of her ruin. The evening of the private event arrived cloaking Manhattan in a crisp twilight. Inside Aurelia, the atmosphere was electric. The dining room, usually humming with conversation, was exquisitely silent, every table perfectly set, as if for a full house of phantom diners. The entire staff was on duty, a small army assembled to serve a single enigmatic guest. Kelsey was not among them. She was in the sweltering heat of the kitchen, her server's uniform swapped for a drab apron. Her task was peeling potatoes, a menial job designed as a quiet punishment. Each scrape of the peeler felt like a fresh humiliation. Through the swinging doors, she heard the staff's excited whispers as they awaited Mr. Winslow's arrival, making her feel like a ghost at the feast of her own downfall. At precisely 8 o'clock, Paul Winslow entered. He wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a simple t-shirt, a subtle departure from his usual corporate armor. His grey eyes swept over the surreal scene as Antoine greeted him with a reverential bow. "Mr. Winslow, the restaurant is at your disposal." Richard Evans, the floor manager, stepped forward, his smile polished. "A pleasure, sir. We are here to ensure a perfect evening." Paul gave a curt nod, bypassing his usual corner spot for the table set in the absolute center of the room. He sat a solitary king in a velvet court, and the bizarre spectacle of the service began. A team of servers, led by a visibly nervous Jessica, presented a parade of elaborate dishes, each one for his solitary consideration. Paul remained mostly silent, his expression unreadable, observing every interaction. He allowed the charade to continue through the first course. Then, as the plates were cleared, he raised a hand. The quiet gesture brought the entire operation to a standstill. "Antoine?" he said, his voice carrying with unnerving clarity in the silent room. "The service is impeccable, but something is missing." Antoine rushed to his side. "Sir, is there anything we can provide?" Paul's eyes scanned the assembled staff, who stood like statues. "I was under the impression that your best waitress was a young woman named Kelsey Ellison," he stated calmly. "I don't see her. I specifically requested her." A collective silent shock rippled through the room. Jessica's face went pale. Richard's practiced smile froze. Antoine, caught completely off guard, stammered, "Mr. Winslow, there was a last-minute staffing change. I can assure you Jessica is one of our finest." "I'm sure she is," Paul interrupted, his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "But she is not the waitress I requested. Where is Miss Ellison?" The silence was deafening. All eyes turned to Antoine, who glanced helplessly toward his floor manager. Richard, seeing his scheme unraveling, decided to make his final desperate gambit. He stepped forward, wringing his hands in a pantomime of regret. "Sir, if I may, Richard Evans, the floor manager. We were trying to protect your privacy. Miss Ellison, she's a sweet girl, but she has developed a rather intense fixation. There were claims of gifts of a relationship." He shook his head sadly. "We felt for your comfort. It was best she work in the back tonight." Paul listened to the entire performance without blinking. When Richard finished, he let the silence stretch for a long, excruciating moment. Then he fixed his piercing gaze on the manager. "That's a very compelling story, Richard, especially since I was under the impression that you were the one who found my watch." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Richard's face contorted in panic. Yes, that's right, sir. I found it. I just didn't want any fuss." "Liar." The word was not shouted, but delivered with such quiet, lethal force that it sucked the air from the room. Paul reached into his blazer and produced a small audio recorder. He pressed a button. Richard's own slick, conspiratorial voice filled the restaurant. It was actually I who found his watch. I think she's going to embarrass herself. For her own good, of course. It was a perfect recording of his conversation with Antoine. The color drained from Richard's face. Antoine stared at him, his expression shifting from disbelief to pure fury. Paul switched off the recorder. And as for the claims of gifts, he continued, his relentless gaze shifting to Jessica, whose face was now a mask of terror. Does this look like a secret affair? He gestured to the grand empty room. This is a public statement. He rose from his chair, his tall frame commanding the absolute attention of every person present. I'm here tonight for one reason: to publicly acknowledge an act of integrity so profound it must be celebrated. A few nights ago, I left a watch at my table, a gift from my late father, an object of immeasurable, sentimental value. He paused, letting his words sink in. That watch was found by a young woman who, as I have since learned, is facing immense personal hardship. She could have sold it and solved every one of her problems. No one would have known. But she didn't. She returned it silently, anonymously, and without expectation of reward. That woman, he announced, his voice ringing with authority, was Kelsey Ellison. He turned toward the kitchen doors. Antoine, bring Miss Ellison out here, now. Antoine, his face grim with shame, strode to the kitchen and pushed open the doors. A moment later, Kelsey emerged, blinking in the bright lights of the dining room. Still wearing the drab apron, her face smudged, and her eyes red-rimmed, she looked utterly bewildered. Paul Winslow walked directly to her, his expression softening as he approached. The cold, analytical mask was gone, replaced by something that looked like profound respect. Miss Ellison, he said, his voice now gentle but loud enough for all to hear. I believe this belongs to you. He reached into his pocket and held out the Mercedes key on the palm of his hand. The rumors were true in only one respect, he declared, his eyes locking with hers. I did give you a gift, not as a secret lover, but as a sincere admirer of your character. Honesty like yours is the rarest commodity in this world. It deserves to be rewarded, not punished. This is a key, a symbol, a message to everyone that integrity matters. He placed the key in Kelsey's trembling hand. Tears streamed down her face, no longer tears of sorrow, but of shock, of relief, of overwhelming, heart-stopping vindication. The waitress, who had been shamed and hidden away, now stood in the center of the room, honored by the very man she was accused of deceiving her silent virtue, finally given a voice. The silence that followed Paul Winslow's declaration was absolute. It was broken by Antoine, whose face was a mask of cold fury. He turned on Richard. You are fired. Get out! Richard, stripped of his smarmy charm, offered a single hateful glare at Kelsey before turning and vanishing from the restaurant and her life. Antoine's gaze then fell upon Jessica. She stood frozen, a statue of exposed malice. You as well. He spat the words like chips of ice. Your poison is no longer welcome here. Jessica seemed to shrink, her sharp-edged confidence dissolving as she scurried away, a disgraced figure swallowed by the shadows. The remaining staff stood in chastened silence, their earlier judgment now a palpable source of collective shame. Paul Winslow turned his attention back to Kelsey. She stood rooted to the spot, the key a heavy, solid weight in her hand, the entire surreal scene swirling around her like a fever dream. Miss Ellison, Paul said softly, his voice cutting through her daze. Please, sit. He gestured towards his table. Antoine, his professionalism warring with his deep remorse, rushed to pull out the chair opposite Mr. Winslow. As Kelsey sank into it, he leaned in his voice a low murmur. "Miss Ellison, I am profoundly sorry. I failed you. It will not happen again." Kelsey, seeing the genuine regret in the formidable maitre d's eyes, could only offer a small, forgiving nod. The vast, empty restaurant faded into the background, the universe shrinking to the space between her and the man across the table. The cold, analytical mask she was used to was gone, replaced by an expression of deep, thoughtful sincerity. "I owe you an apology." Paul began, his voice direct. "My method of rewarding you was unconventional. I miscalculated how others would react, and it inadvertently caused you great pain. I am truly sorry for that." Kelsey found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. "You don't have to apologize. I only did what was right." A faint, rare smile touched Paul's lips. "Miss Ellison, Kelsey, very few people do what is right when doing wrong is so much easier, especially when they are in your circumstances." The statement was matter of fact, yet it told her everything. He knew. "I live in a world of transactions. Your silent, anonymous act of integrity was an anomaly, a data point that defied every algorithm I know. I had to understand it. My mother always taught me that your character is the only thing you truly own." Kelsey said the words, giving her strength. "Selling that watch would have been like selling the only part of me that mattered." "Your mother is a very wise woman," Paul said, his gaze direct, and filled with an admiration that felt more valuable than any car. He slid an elegant business card across the table. It held only his name and a private number. "The car is a symbol, a tool, but the problem it was meant to solve requires a more direct solution. The debt you carry is a burden you should never have had to bear." He leaned forward, his voice dropping, slightly imbued with a quiet power that shifted the very atmosphere. "I have a foundation that funds research into neurological diseases, working with the world's leading specialists in multiple sclerosis. Tomorrow morning, the head of that foundation will call you. They will be taking over your mother's case. All of it. Every past bill will be cleared. All future treatments, therapies, and expenses will be covered indefinitely. She will have access to the absolute best care that exists." This was the true gift. Not the car, not the money. But it was the gift of hope, of life, of a future for her mother. The crushing weight Kelsey had carried for years, the relentless tide of bills and fear, simply evaporated. The relief was a physical shock, a dam breaking within her. Sobs of pure, unadulterated joy shook her frame. I don't know what to say." She wept. "Thank you isn't a big enough word." "There is nothing to thank me for," Paul replied, his voice gentle. "Your integrity is its own payment. Just live your life well, Kelsey. That is all the thanks I require." He stood, his presence commanding even in its quietness. "The car will be delivered to you tomorrow. I think," he added with that same small, surprising smile, "you have earned a day off." With a final nod, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Kelsey alone at the table in the center of the vast, silent room. She looked from the car key in one hand to the business card in the other. They were symbols of a staggering new reality, tangible proof that a single, silent act of virtue had rewritten her entire world. The drama was over. Her new life was just beginning. Kelsey's story is a powerful reminder that in a world that often feels loud, cynical, and transactional, the quiet power of integrity can create the most profound impact. She didn't seek a reward. She didn't ask for recognition. Yet her simple, honest choice resonated in the heart of a man who had everything except, perhaps, a reason to believe in simple goodness. Her journey from a struggling waitress to a woman in control of her own destiny wasn't about the car or the money. It was about the validation of her character. We all face our own lost watch moments, choices big and small that define who we are. What would you have done? We believe that stories like this, stories of real-life drama and unexpected virtue, deserve to be heard. If Kelsey's story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds don't go unnoticed, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. Your support helps us keep sharing tales that prove character is the one currency that never loses its value.